folks.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another remote edition of the Daf Yomi Shiur, this time broadcasting from Far Rockaway and in all of your homes. Thank you so much for the flexibility. We are at a new Mishnah on Nun Daled Amud Aleph. And the new Mishnah says, Ve'elu ksheirus bebehema. This is the opposite of last Mishnah. Last Mishnah was all of the trephos, and we listed all the things that make an animal treifa. These are injuries that are not severe enough to make the animal into a treifa. First one is nikva hargargeres. If the trachea gets punctured, as we said before, the punctured trachea does not render it into a treifa unless it is cut in the majority, right, in the circumference. Oceanistica, and if it is cracked also, it doesn't cause a problem as long as the severance doesn't go into the top and the bottom pieces. And ad kama techsar, how much of a hole does it take in order for, well, it can still stay kosher? So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, ad ki isar ha'italki, as long as you don't have an isar ha'italki amount on it. So as we said, we've mentioned that shiur before. Nifchasa hagulgoles, if the skull is missing a piece, so then that is not going to be a problem as long as velonikav karam shamach, as long as the membrane that encases the brain doesn't also rupture. If the membrane that's encasing the brain stays intact, but the skull is open, then that is not a treifa. Nikiv halev, if there's a puncture in the heart, but it doesn't go all the way into the cavity. We had before that if it does, then it's a treifa. This is if it doesn't, it's not a treifa. Nishbira hashidra, if the spine breaks, velo nifsak, but the spinal cord does not break. Right, lo nifsak hachutshula. Nitla hakaved, if the liver is removed, nishtayer himena kazayas, but a kazayas remains, then that's okay. And we had contrasted this Mishnah and last Mishnah, if you recall, because last one just said if the entire liver is missing. This one says you have to have a kazayas left. And then we said, well, which is it? Do you have to have all of it missing and a little bit is okay? Or do you need a kazayas? And we said it's a machlokas between this Mishnah and last Mishnah, whether you need a kazayas or not. Hamseis ubeis hakosos. Sean Habers are asking for the passcode, by the way.
Okay. Yep, I'll provide that. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good. Hamsesu beis hakosos, if the other stomachs, not the cave of the paunch, but the second and third, the reticulum and the omesum, those two stomachs, and they attach to each other. If they have a hole between the two, shenikvu zelatoch zeh, but the hole leads from one of the stomachs to the other stomach, so then those are that's not going to be a problem either, because what's the worst thing could happen? It just runs from one stomach to the other stomach, and it's supposed to go there anyway. So that's not a problem. Nital hatachol, if the spleen, we said a punctured spleen is a problem for treifa, but if the whole spleen is missing, it's not. Nital hakloyos, if the kidneys are missing. Nital lechi that's not going to be a treifa. Nital lechi hatachton, if the lower jaw is missing. We said before that's as long as the pipe that connects the trachea and the esophagus is still connected to the throat, and the lower jaw that's missing doesn't disconnect that. Nitla ha'im shala, if its womb is missing. Ve'charusa, also if its lungs get dried up, right, and they appeared all they get seized, I guess they shrivel up, but because they bidei shemayim, if they shrivel up because of some natural cause, so then we presume that they're going to go back and heal and be fine. Hagluda, if the animal's skin is flayed, and Rabbi Meir says that's still not a treifa. Chum Post in the Chum says that is a treifa. Okay, let's get into our Gemara. Itmar, we said in the base measure, Rabbi Yochanan says elu treifos. So from the Mishnah before, we said these are the treifos. So dafka, those are the ones that are specifically the treifos. Anything not listed in the previous Mishnah is not a treifa. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says elu ksheros dafka. This Mishnah says anything that is listed here is kosher. Anything that's an injury that's not listed here is treifa. So anything that's not listed in both places, that's where you have a machlokas. If something's not listed in both, so Rabbi Yochanan is going to say it's kosher, and Reish Lakish is going to say it's a treifa. The Mike Kamiflagi, what's an example of something that they would be arguing about? So you could also make uh, so bid to Rav Masna. The answer is they're arguing of Rav Masna. Rav Masna had a case in the Shev Shmatza, the seven other types of trephos that were on our list that were not included in our Mishnah. His one was the first one that was on the list. Damar Rav Masna. Rav Masna says, "Hay buka da'atma." The back, the thigh has a ball. It's a ball joint that goes into the hip. If that gets dislocated and the tendons rip so that the bone is separated from the hip bone is separated from the thigh bone, so then that is going to be a question here. So it's deshaf miduchte if it floats away from its place. So treifa. So he says it's a treifa. So Rabbi Yochanan says elu treifos dafka, that everything that was in the list of the last Mishnah was all the treifos. So therefore, so Tana treifos. Tana, so it says there, there it says Tana Trefos. He lists all of the Trefos. Then it says Vitana Zehaklal. All of the other things. There were a bunch of things. If we by the way, if we email the link to the Habers, they could get
Yeah.
it. So,
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
because they just need to click it. They just can't click it on a computer. Anyway, so Vitana Zekal. Then it also says this is the general rule that everything that's a treifa means that there are other items that were included in that will cause that will be an injury, but are not on the list, but are included in the Mishnah as well. Vechazye liderav masna da'asya bizehaklal. So then we said that which is included in the list. Rav Masna's rule is included in the list. Rav Masna's rule of the thigh bone being disconnected from the hip bone is also a treifa from the list of zehaklal. This is the rule. Anything that's going to die is going to be a treifa. De'asya b'zehaklal. My taima. Why is that? Dedamya linetule. Because it is similar to if an animal has its leg severed. So we know if the animal's leg is severed, then that's going to be a treifa. And so this animal that is not severed, but it's dislocated, it's in the same category as that. And so therefore, Tana Elu Trefos, it includes this and say, these are the Trefos. Hani Huda Trefa, Ha Rav Masna, Kshera. So this is coming to tell you, you might have thought to include Rav Masna, but since it's not listed in the list of items that are in our Mishnah, so Rabbi Yochanan is suggesting that since this injury of the hip bone being disconnected from the thigh bone is not on the list, it is in fact kosher, not a treifa. Even though you might have thought it's similar to it being a leg that's severed, it is not included because the list of the last Mishnah is all inclusive. It says zeh treifa, and that's how Rabbi Yochanan is. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says the opposite. Elu ksheros davka. Our Mishnah says these are the ones that are specifically kosher. Tana treifos v'tana ze'aklal. It says these are the ones before that are treifa, and then it includes all other ones that are in the same category. V'chazye litter of masna delo asya b'ze'aklal. You might have thought that Rav Masna's rule isn't included in that ze'aklal in this rule. My time, why would you think that? Lav linikuve damya, because it's not a puncture. It's an internal wound. It's not, after all, like a puncture like all the other ones on the list. It's not severed or removed. It's not like other items on this list where we've got a limb that's severed or removed because the leg is still attached. So v'linatule nami lo damya. So it's not like any of the other types. It's not a missing limb. It's not a severed limb. It's not a punctured limb. So therefore, it wouldn't be included. So that's what I have thought. So therefore, Reish Lakish says, our Mishnah says, Elu ksheros. These are the list of things that are kosher. Hani hudik ksheros. It's only these that are kosher. Had Rav Masna, that item that's on Rav Masna's list is a treifa. So that's the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whether this hip bone and thigh bone, this dislocated back leg of the cow is going to be included in the treifa. So Rabbi Yochanan says no, and Reish Lakish says yes. Okay, Gufa. Let's discuss this rule of Rav Masna. So Amar Rav Masna says, Hai buka da atma, this bone, this thigh bone, connecting to the hip bone, deshaf miduchte, that gets dislocated from its place, treifa. That's what he says. That's a treifa. The Rava Amar Rava says ksher, Rava says it's kosher. Now, the ifsik nive, if the tendons that hold it in place, right? The bone is connected to bone through these tendons. If those are ripped, so then treifa. Then even Rava agrees it's a treifa. The hilchasa and the halacha is if siknami kshera, even if those tendons tear, it is still kosher. It's not a treifa. Ad demis akla is akule until it's ripped off and torn off so much that the tendon becomes dried up and completely worn away. If it becomes to that level of being removed, then it is in fact a treifa. Okay, the next Mishnah says ad kama techser. The next on the list was the first item on the list was the trachea. How much of the trachea do you need in order for it to be a still kosher? As long as it's less than an isar talki, we said. So Amar Zeiri said, Atun dulo mischame lechon shiura, since you have never seen an isar talki and you don't know what size this is, shiure the dinara kur dinah. You can know that it's in this Kurdish type of coin, this dinar, this Kurdish. They lived in a place called near Arat in Turkey, which is where the Kurdish people live today. And so these Turkish people had a coin called the dinar, and this dinar, Kurdish dinar, was the same size as the Isar Talki. So if you want to know about trephos, you can also look at that coin. Vahavi kipshita zutarti, and the way that you can also know it is that it's the same size as a small pruta coin, the bronze pruta coin that they had. Mishtakha beni pshita de pumpadisa. And that's one of the smaller coins that are in Pumpadisa, right? In Pumpadisa, they had these coins. So if you've seen around in Pumpadisa, whatever the dime was, that's the small coin, right? So that's the dime of Pumpadisa. They had that little small pruta coin. That coin is also the size of the Isar Italki. Amar Rabbi Chana Pesora. So Rabbi Chana, who was a money changer, so he was familiar with all the types of currency. Ila minoi havakoi. Barnafcha. So I was sitting there minding my own business, and up comes the son of the blacksmith, right? That is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's father was a blacksmith. And so he said, he comes up behind me, Ubai mini, and he asked me, Dinara kurdina lisharbe trefsa. So he says, I'd like to have from you. Do you have a one of these dinar kurdina, these Kurdish dinar coins? Because I'd like to. I have a case, and I need to measure the hole in the trachea to see if it's kosher or not. Can I borrow one? Well, boy, lemeka mikame, and I wanted to get up in order to stand because Rabbi Yochanan's there, so you stand up when the Rebbe walks in. So I wanted to stand up. V'lo shavkani, he wouldn't let me stand up for him. I love when these are like the side stories, right? Right? The Rebbe wouldn't let me stand up because Amar Li, he said, shave, B'ni, shave. You've got to sit. Because Ein Bali Umnus Rishoin Lamod Mipnei Talmidei Chachamim. You're at work, so you can't get up and stand. Waste time. B'shah Sukin B'malachtam. You're working for somebody. So you can't get up and waste your time. So think about that. Like next time you want to make a personal phone call during work hours or something, right? We don't think about this amount of diligence that we have for the workplace. He says you can't stand up for me because you're busy. I just want to borrow a coin, but you can't stand up for me. Vilo, but is that true? Is Rabbi Yochanan in fact correct that he can't stand up? That's not. We're in a Mishnah that when the people would bring Bikurim to Yerushalayim, they used to make a big parade. And the people are bringing Bikurim, and all of it says, Kol Bali Umnios Omdim Mipnehem. Everybody in Yerushalayim used to stand up when the parade of Bikurim walked by in order to give them honor because they're in the middle of this mitzvah of Bikurim, such an important mitzvah. The Sholem Bishlomo, and everybody would say, how are you? And they would welcome them into town. V'omrim lahem, and they would say to them, Achenu anshi makom ploni, our brothers from such and such a location, Boachim b'sholom, welcome to town, welcome to Yerushalayim. Thank you for bringing the Bikurim. It's amazing. And they'd make a whole parade out of it. So how are they allowed to get up? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Mipnei hem omdim, mipnei talmidei chachamim ein omdim. They're allowed to stand up for the people bringing Bikurim, not for Gedolim, not for the rabbi. Why is that? So I'm Rabbi Yossi bar Abin. So I'm Rabbi Yossi bar Abin said, Bore kama chaviva mitzvah b'shata. You should see how important it is to do the mitzvah in its proper time. You get an opportunity to do a mitzvah. You do a mitzvah, you get more kavod while you're doing a mitzvah than you give to a rav. Shari mipnei because you're going to stand up for these people bringing bikurim, but mipnei tamidei chachamim omdim. You're not going to stand up for tamidei chachamim. Mimai, how do you know that that's really what this is teaching us? Dilma kadesh lo tehei nimtza machshilin lasid lavo. Maybe there's a special reason by bikurim. It's because we wanted to make people feel so welcome when they brought bikurim that they would do it next year, right? We wanted to make sure that they were so excited about bringing bikurim, so therefore we made a special parade out of it. But generally speaking, you're not even allowed to stand up for people who are doing mitzvahs. You can't stand up for the Talmidei Chachamim, and that's that. Okay, Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, Kesela. He says that the next item on our list is the hole in the skull. How much is a hole in the skull that is going to create that is not a problem? It's the size of a sela. Yeser mi kesela. And when we say a sela, we mean that the sela itself is the same thing as greater than the sela, meaning that a hole that's greater than a sela is a problem. A hole of a sela is also a problem. Less than a sela is not a problem. Okay, so that's what he's saying. Once you get to a sela, it's a problem. So ki isar, yeser mi kisar. And same thing when we had the trachea. When we were dealing with the size of an isar and above is a problem. Less than the isar is not, which means that he's holding alma kasava Rav Nachman, that Rav Nachman is holding in our famous question throughout Shas, ad velo ad bichlal. When we say that something is the halacha up until a certain point, do we mean up until including that number, or up to that number and then above that number is the other halacha? So he's saying that up until an isar is a treifa, and then an isar is not a treifa. Sorry, up until an isar is not a treifa. Once you get to an isar, it is a treifa, and above is a treifa. So isar is the cutoff. When the Mishnah says up to an isar, it means up until, but not including an isar. So that's what we're saying, that Rav Nachman holds. Up until means up until and not including. Okay, well, if that's true, Eis ve Rava Rav Nachman. Rava asks Rav Nachman the following question. Chevel hayotzi men hamita. If you have, they used to have beds, and the way their beds were, they would have a wooden, like I imagine like a wooden square, right? A wooden rectangle. And then they would tie ropes from one to the other. And by going across, they could lie their bedding on top of it, and it would be held up by the ropes that would go across. They didn't have like a box spring. They just had like a ropes that would go across. Now, when they would tie the ropes, so then there could be extra rope left over at the end. So if you've got rope that's left over, they tied it from one side to the other side, and now you've got some leftover rope dangling. So it's chevel hayotzi min hamita. It's rope that's dangling off the side of the bed. Ad chamisha tfachim tahor. If the rope is up until 5 tfachim, now we're going to worry, is this up until and including or up until and not including? Up until 5 tfachim of rope, like this much, right? That, if the bed becomes tameh, the rope is tahor. That extra piece of rope is tahor. Why? Because it's useless, right? This extra little piece of string doesn't help. It can't be used for any purpose for the bed, and so therefore it's not considered as part of the bed. So if the bed becomes tameh, that piece of rope is still tahor. So, my lav chamisha kilomata, when it says up until 5, don't we mean 5 is the same as below 5? That if it's exactly 5 tfachim, that means it's not tameh? So, the answer he gives is lo chamisha kilmala. No, maybe 5 means like above, right? 5 is tahor. Okay, fine. So, sorry, 5 is tameh. So, less than 5 is tahor up until 5, and then at 5, like Rav Nachman said consistently, at 5 it becomes tameh. So Toshma, come and listen to the next part. Mechamisha v'ad asara, if the rope is between 5 tfachim and 10 tfachim, so now it's useful to the bed. I'm not quite sure what they would use that extra string for. Maybe they'd hang things off the bed or whatever it was, but they would use that string, was usable for the bed. It's long enough. So now it's tameh. If the bed becomes tameh, that extra string becomes tameh as well. My lav asara kilomata, are we not suggesting then that up until 10 is tameh? 10 and above is above 10 is tahor, and that means at 10 is going to be like below and say it's tameh. So therefore ad 10 means including 10. So the answer to that, of course, is lo, asara kilamala. No, now we're saying 10 is like the above. It's not included in it. So above, it's like above. So fine. So we're being consistent. Rav Nachman is being consistent. At 5, 5 is going to become tame. 10, 10 becomes tahor. The number itself is not included in the statement. When we say up until 5, we mean 5 and above is tame. Up until 10, 10 and above becomes tahor. So let's try something else. Toshma, come and listen. Hadakin shebiklei cheres, hein v'karkarosehen v'dafnosehem, yoshvin shelo misumachin. A case of small earthenware utensils. They were a larger utensil, but it broke. So now you've got little shards. So if you've got the pieces of this broken utensil, right, they're the walls of it, the floor of it, the base of it, as long as they can still hold a liquid in those broken pieces, then they can then if the original utensil was tame, so that utensil remains tame because it's still a usable utensil as it stands. They're smaller, but they're still broken off pieces. It's still tame. So the shi'uron, what size, right? At some point it gets too small to be used. It's powder, obviously, it's not going to be tame. So what size is it? Bichdei sichas katan. The amount of oil you need for the smallest purpose we could think of, which is to put anointing oil onto the pinky finger of a child, right? Very small amount of oil. So as long as it can hold that, it's useful. The ad lug, until it gets to a lug, right? Once it becomes to the size of a lug, so that's going to, then it becomes a larger utensil. So, one second. Right. So I guess once it gets to be a larger size and once it gets to be a lug size, so then people don't use that anymore. Right. So therefore, because it was a larger utensil, but now it's a larger shard, I guess it doesn't include anymore. So once it's the size of up to a lug, so here's again another circumstance of up to. Up to a lug is going to be still tame from a luv and so my lav lug kilomata. Are we not saying if the utensil holds exactly a lug, it's still tame like below? So the answer is low. No, lug kilamala. Again, it's like Rabbi Nachman said, lug means the size above. Once you get to a lug, it's going to be the size above. Toshma, we'll try again. Milug ve'ad se'ah. If I've got a utensil, right, now I've got a larger utensil, and the size is from a lug to a se'ah, right? A lug is, we had 10 ounce, 12 ounce kind of a cup, all the way up to the size that it holds a se'ah, which is much larger. So those utensils, if they break beravius, then the size that it can stay as tame is with revius. So my love se'ah kilamata. Are we not saying the se'ah is like, once we get to, we said once it's from a revius to a se'ah, so se'ah should be included in the lower amount, low. Se'ah kilamala. Se'ah is like above, like the size above. So that didn't prove anything either. Toshma, come and listen. Se'ah v'ad this statement continues. If you've got a utensil, right, when it was large enough, it was between a sa'ah up until 2 sa'ahs, bechatzi lug. So if it breaks, right, so then it can still accept tuma as long as it has a half lug volume. So my lav masayim kilomat. Are we not saying that the 2 sa'ah is like the 1 sa'ah in that it is even going to be tameh in the size of the half a lug, and therefore the 2 lug follows the size of the lower, and therefore it is up until and including? The answer is low, still sasayim kilamala. No, the 2 lug goes to the upper size, also not included. Vihatanya. But 1 second. After you've explained all of that, and every time we come up with a size, you're telling me that the size is up until but not including, and then that item goes to the next size up. But vihatanya, we learn in a brisa, lug kilamata that when it comes to a lug, so then the lug itself follows the lower size. The sa'ah, kilamata follows the smaller size. And sasayim and tusa is kilamata follows the lower size, which means that it's always following up until and included. So how does Rav Nachman going to understand that? Because he's saying that up until does not include. So the answer is Hasam l'chumra. The answer is Rav Nachman is not saying that we always say up until and not including. Rav Nachman is saying that since we don't know what up until means, it could be up until and including, up until not including, we always go stringently. Therefore, when it comes to the case of the treifa, we say that once you get to that size, it's a treifa. So up until, but not including, is kosher. Once you get to the coin, now from that coin and above is treifa. However, when we're dealing with these circumstances about the utensils that are tameh, we're going to say that these larger size utensils are going to follow the rule of the smaller utensil, making their shards tameh in the smaller sizes, which is a stricter ruling. So we're always going to follow the stricter ruling, not by saying there's a consistent rule that we always say that we go up until and not including. Whether it's including or it's not including is going to depend on whatever the strict view is. And we're going to prove that. To Amar Rabbi Avo says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Kol shi'urei chachamim lahachmir. All rules, whenever the chachamim gave a measurement, they're always going to go strict, right? They always say to use strictness. Chutz migris shel kesamim, except when it comes to marking bloodstains for a nida, which we'll discuss when we get to Maseches Nida. So in those bloodstains, so we're going to go lenient there, and that's because when it comes to a woman becoming a nida, so she's not a nida midoraisa, we're going to learn, unless she feels that she has a cramp. Then once she has a cramp, so then she becomes a nida. A blood means that she didn't have any cramp. She just saw blood on her garment. So she doesn't know whether it's from her or not from her. So now they measured the amount of blood that's required for it to be a blood stain, for her to be a nida, to be kidgris, like the size of a bean. Why? Because lice, if you smash one, is filled with blood. The size of blood that would come from that, and they were fairly common back then, would be a bean size. So if we can presume that we have a stain that's about the size, that if we have a stain that's about the size of a bean, it could either be a nida or it could not. Well, we will go leniently. Why? She didn't have any feeling. So she didn't have any feeling about it. We're not really talking about being a nida on a Torah level anyway. We're being lenient on a rabbinic level. So therefore, on a rabbinic level, we can be lenient with this size. But all otherwise, generally speaking, we're always going to be stringent when it comes to sizes. So Rav Nachman is not saying up until but not including the Yisar Italki by the Treifa, because that's his general rule. He's just saying that's the best way to be strict. Daikanami, you can even show that this is the case, because we're going to see that there's a self-contradicting rule, and that is Diktani Allah Dahi. We have a brisa which talks about that case of the bed that we discussed, where we said up until 5, the rope is tahor. From 5 till 10, the rope is tameh, and then from 10 and on, the rope is tahor again. Cramping would be a sign of pregnancy, Yehuda, but one can't become a nida while they are pregnant, right? Because being a nida would presume that the woman is not pregnant. So we will again learn all of those details when we get to the halachos of nida. So, although that may not entirely, but yes, that's essentially the case. So chamisha kilamala. So when it comes to up until the first 4 plus tfachim, so it's tahor. 5 and above is kilamala, is going to be tameh, and then asara kilamat, and then 10 falls below. Now that makes no sense, because either you're going to say 5 should be like above, then 10 should be like above. If you're going to say 10 is below, then 5 should be below. How are you telling me that 5 is like above and 10 is like below? The answer is because since the zone of Tuma is between 5 and 10, we're going to be strict. And we're going to say exactly at 5 is also tummy. Exactly at 10 is still tummy. So we're going to be strict on either side. And we're going to say exactly at 5 is tummy and exactly at 10 is tummy. Above and below is not. All right, next case that we would like to discuss in our Mishnah is Nita HaTchol. The spleen is missing. Some Rabbi Shmeid Rava, Rav says the name of Rava, Lo Shanu Ela Nital. That's only if it's missing. Aval, Nikov, if it has a hole in it, Treifa, that is Treifa, as we've said. Mesiv Rabbi Yossi bar Abin. So Rabbi Yossi bar Abin asked the following question: V'itema Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. Some says Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida. Chosech bim meubar shivamei eha. Let's say I have a person reaches into a cow that's pregnant and cuts up the fetus inside the cow. Okay, so it aborts the fetus, right? But it's still inside. So then you do shchita on the cow. Mutter ba'achila. You can eat the chopped up fetus. Sounds gross, but you could because because it's part of the animal. It's just a piece of meat inside of the animal. Min ha'tchol min ha'klolios aser ba'achila. But if you cut off a piece of the spleen or a piece of the kidneys and it remains inside the animal, once you do shchita to the animal, then you can't eat that piece of spleen or the piece of kidneys. So that means ha behema. It means that because why? Because that's now severed. It's not part of the animal. It's completely severed. Now ha behema gufa sharia. Now that would imply, well, what did you do? Somehow you poked in there and you cut the part of the spleen off. And now you're saying that if I shecht it, I can't eat that part of the spleen, but I can eat the rest of the animal. Well, why? If you just told me if I puncture a spleen, unless I take off the entire thing, the animal is a treifa. So if you cut off part of the spleen, isn't the whole animal a treifa? Forget that piece of spleen. The whole animal is treifa. So why is it that you're worried about not eating the spleen? So the answer the Gemara gives is, no, you're right. It is a treifa. Hu adin dafilu behema nami asira. It's not only the spleen is not allowed to be eaten, but the whole animal can't be eaten. Aidi tana reisha mutar ba'achila tani namasefa aser ba'achila. The only thing is that in Mishnayos and Braisos, in this case a Mishnah, we like to balance the language. So if the first part of the language was you can eat the fetus, so therefore the language at the end is, but you can't eat the spleen. But of course you can't eat the rest of the animal either way. V'bois emo, or else if you want, I will say nikav l'chud v'nechtach l'chud, that there's a difference between puncturing and cutting a whole piece off. That puncturing a spleen is going to make it a treifa, but cutting off a whole piece doesn't make the animal a treifa. Interesting, right? Cutting off a whole piece doesn't make it a treifa, and the animal is still kosher, even though the spleen can't be eaten. Next case, nitlu hakloyos. If the kidneys are off, right, removed from the animal, then it can live. Now it's interesting, right? Kidneys are very important for cleansing the blood, but apparently, according to the note in the art scroll, the cows can live without kidneys. That some part of their digestive system allows cows to be able to cleanse their blood without kidneys. So therefore, the theory here is that minus kidneys, cows are not trephos, right? Human beings are not like that. Amar Rachish bar Papa Mishmei Rav. Rachish bar Papa said in Rav, Laksa bekuya achas. If one of the kidneys is afflicted, so then treifa, the animal's a treifa. Amri b'marav, they said in Eretz Yisrael, Vehu demitoi lukusa. That is when, if that's when the affliction, whatever is causing, that's making the kidney get diseased, goes all the way into the cavity on the inside of the kidney, where I guess the sinews and things are attached to it. Vehecha makom choretz, where is that? Lechivara. It's this white part on the inside. I think you have a picture in the bottom of the art scroll there. So white part on the inside of the kidney. That's the part that is going to be that ruins the kidney. The tutoi masni, because that is going to get under the right. That gets under the the outside of the animal and into the inner parts of the kidney, and that's what makes the kidney a treifa. Amar Rabbi Nechunya. Rabbi Nechunya says, "Shiltinhu lekulu trufai demarava." I asked all of the people who were experts in trephos in Eretz Yisrael, and va'amruli, and they said to me, "Hilchasa kerachish bar papa." The halacha is like rachish bar papa, that if you have a diseased kidney, right, it can make the animal into a treifa. Velo veles hilchasa kerav avira. But the halacha is not like Rav Avira, that if you have a puncture in a spleen, that makes it into a treifa. Lo amran ella bekulshe. Now that's only when the puncture is in the place where it starts to get skinny. You have a top part of the spleen and it gets narrower as it goes down. So if that's in the narrow part of the spleen, aval besumche. However, if the top part of the spleen gets punctured and that is the thick part of the spleen, then it's a treifa. Then it is a treifa. The ishtayer bek ovi dinar zahav kshira. If the spleen is punctured, but it's not all the way through, and a thickness of a dinar coin, gold dinar coin, is still remaining, then it's still a kshira. Amri b'marav. They also said in Eretz Yisrael, kol a posel bireya, anything that is a violation that makes an animal a treifa by a lung, kosher bikulia, is going to be not a problem. That's not be a treifa when it comes to the kidneys. Shehare nekev. Did I say that right? No, I'm sorry. Yeah, by the kidney. Sorry. Right. So shehare nakav psul bireya, a puncture is a psul by a lung. The kosher bekulia, that's not going to be a problem by the kidneys. And the kol shekain hecha de kosher bireya, anything that's kosher by a lung is kosher bekulia, will be kosher by kulia by the kidney. Maskif la Rabbi Tanchuma. So Rabbi Tanchuma asked a question that uklalahu, is that true? Vahare mugla. What about mugla when it's got a thick liquid inside of the lungs? De kosher bereya. That we said was fine when it comes to the lungs. Upasal bekulia, but that's going to make it treifa by a kidney. So therefore, we see that the kidney, there is a circumstance where the kidney is a treifa, even though a lung would not be. The hare mayim zakin. What about if we've got a clear liquid? Diksherim hacha v'hacha. That those circumstances, if it's got a clear liquid, so that's going to be perfectly fine, according to both the for the lung and for the kidney. El Amar Ravashi. So Ravashi says instead, Trefos kamardamis lehadadi. You are trying to compare one organ to another. And we said, Ein omrim betrefos zudome. You can't lezu. You can't compare lungs to kidneys. They're not the same. So don't say this is because if you have this in a lung, it's okay. That means it's definitely okay in a kidney. You can't compare. Why? Shehare, because we also know chodcha mikan umesa, that you can slice off someplace in the neck of an animal over here and it will die. Chodcha mikan, and then you're going to cut it over another place in the simanim and a mesa, it will chod mitchan v'chaisa, and it'll live. So therefore, you can't compare, right? Just because you do the same action here and there, that doesn't necessarily apply from one to the other. Umayim zakim kshera. So when it comes to this clear liquid by the kidneys, we said that it's kosher. It's not a treifa. Lo omran ela detzili. That is only if the liquid is clear. Aval avire, however, if it's cloudy liquid, treifa, then it's a treifa. V'chi tzili nami lo omran, and even if it's clear, we didn't say it was a kosher, ela de lo sriach, as long as it's not putrid smelling. Aval sriach, but if it's putrid smelling, so then it's a treifa. Okay. Kulia shehiktina, if you've got a kidney that has shriveled, become small, bedaka and small animal, ad kipul, until it gets to be the size of a bean, begasa, and begasa ad ke'anova benonis, and by a large animal the size of a grape, a mid-sized grape. That's the size that it has to shrivel down to in order for it to be a treifa. Next, we read that. It's in parentheses. I will read it for, not sure why it's in parentheses, whether we're supposed to take it out. Dalit, hang on a second. Take it out, can't find. Yeah, the Marshal takes it out, but others do, so let's read it. Nita lechi hatachton, if the lower jaw is removed, somewhere Reb Zera says, Lo shanu el yechola lechios al yedei liita. So as long as it still has to be able to be force fed, right? In other words, a person still has to be able to put food down its throat in order for it to live. The hamara, and also, um, sorry, this has to be. It still has it. It's still able to live with liita. Liita is the place where you put the food into its mouth, um, and by mra, the liita is the place, like that's the part of the back of the animal's throat that it can no longer spit it back up. So if you can push it down that way, aval ena yachol lichios al yedei liita v'amra treifa. But if it can't be force fed, and a human being put the food down the animal's mouth, then it's a treifa. Nitla ha'em shalah. If the womb is missing, so we said it's not a treifa. So tana hi ha'em hi tarpachas hi shal puchis. Different words for a womb, right? You can also know that when you see ha'em in a Mishnah, it also refers to the tarpachas, which is in a brisa, which we're going to see later on, and it's also the name called shal puchis, which is another brisa on Daf Mem Ches, which we had above. All of those are the same word, meaning the womb. The charusa bidei shemayim kishera. Now we said when the animal gets scared, when it is and the lung shrivels up, it's still kosher. So ezehu charusa. What are we talking about when we're talking about a shriveled up lung? So kol shetzamka reya, as long as the lung shrivels up, bidei shemayim, from a natural scare, ksher, it's kosher. Bidei adam, but if it gets scared by a human being, treifa, it's a treifa. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, af bidei kol habrios, even if it gets scared by any other animal, that's also going to freak it out and it's going to ruin the lung. So we asked the question, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Aresha Kai Ulakul is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. What is he saying? Is he going on the beginning part and he's saying any other, and he's going leniently, meaning that all other types of animals are like natural, and therefore the lung is not a treifa? Or, a seifa koyer, is he saying human beings and also other creatures, so that it's a treifa, ulachumra. So which is it? Titania, so we learned Tashma, so come and listen. Titania learner brisa, bidei adam treifa. If a human being scares the animal and it causes the lung to shrivel up, it's a treifa. Rishim and Lazar says, af bidei kol abrios, even all other animals as well. So therefore you see that any other animals as well is going to include it in the treifa category. Rabbi Rechana havak ozel be madbara. Rabbi Rechana was going along in the desert. Ashkach hanu dichri, he saw some rams, bitzamek readitu, and he shechted them, and he found that they had a shriveled up lung. Also, Sholbe Midrash, he went to the base medrash to ask what to do about it. Amrulay, they said to him, Bekaita, so I see Mishichle Chevari. So in the summertime, right, that it's very warm outside. So what you need to do is you're going to bring a white tub and umalinu maya kariri, and you're going to put some cold water in it. Va'anchinhu, and you're going to put it in there. So meis lace for 24 hours. Ihadron baryon, if it comes back to being back to healthy, so bidei shemaimi, then you know that it was a temporary problem and it was scared by a natural phenomenon, and it's kosher. Ve'ilo, and if not, so then treifa, then it's a treifa. Besitfa, but during the winter time, so then you have to worry about the water getting too cold. So I see mishichle shichume, you're going to bring a black utensil, which will absorb the heat better and keep it nice and warm. And you're going to fill it with lukewarm water. You're going to put the lung there, mace lace for 24 hours. Ihadra baria, if it goes back to normal, then kshera ilo treifa. Then if it does not, it is a treifa. The next case was a guluda, if the animal is flayed, and so therefore it has skin missing. So Tana Rabbanan, hagluda, if the animal is skin missing, so then Rabbi Meir says it's not a treifa, and the Chachamim Posim and Chachamim say it is a posim. Kvarhed Elazar Safra, the Rabbi Yochanan bar Gudgada al Hagluda, and Elazar Safra and Yochanan ben Gudgada had already testified about this, Shepsula, that they are treifos. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Chazer bo Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir changed his mind, and he said originally it was kosher, but now he's changed his mind, and he says it's also treifa. Miklau, did Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Polig, Rabbi Meir begluda. So now, if Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is saying, if Shimon Elazar says that Rabbi Meir changed his mind, so then that means that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is holding that Rabbi Meir had an argument originally, right? He had originally had an argument and he changed his mind. Vehatanya, but we have a different brisa. Brisa says, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Shimon Elazar says, Lo nechleku Rabbi Meir v'cham mal gluda shepsula, that Rabbi Meir and the Chum did not argue that a animal that has skin missing is a treifa. Ukvar hey Rabbi Oshaya benosh Rabbi Yehuda ha balsam, and Rabbi Oshaya, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, the sales merchant of perfumes, Lifnei Rabbi Akiva, he testified in front of Rabbi Akiva, Mishum Rabbi Tarfon, in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, ala gluda, about an animal that has been skinned, that shep psula is puzzle. And if it has one sella's worth of skin, it's kshever, then it's still kosher. So Amar Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak explains, my lo nechliku, what do you mean that they didn't argue? Lo amad Rabbi Meir b'machla kuso. That means that they originally did argue, they just stopped arguing. They didn't continue to they did not continue to argue after the fact. They changed their mind and didn't argue, and that's what he's reporting in the second price. Amar Mar says, Im nishtayr bo kesela ksheru. We just said that if you have enough skin of the size of a sella, then it is kosher. Iboilu. So we asked the following question. De'arich v'kotim, if the amount of skin is long, that's left over is long and thin, dechimitzarf la besela, and if you combine all that skin together, you get a sella. O dilma berochav sela al pnei hashedra kula. Or it could be the width of a sella all along the back of the animal. Bottom line is, if you still have enough healthy skin left on the animal, so then the skin will grow back, right? If it's got not even a little bit left, so then it won't. Tashma, come and listen. Deparish Rabbi Noroi Mishmei Shmuel, that Rabbi Noroi, he explained in Shmuel, Berochev Kasela, if you have a piece of patch of skin, the width of a sella, al pnei kol shidra kula, all along the back. So then Rabbi Barachana says, Roshe Prokim. So then each part of the bones of the animal has enough of from here to be able to grow skin back onto that part. And so then, therefore, it's not a treifa. Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus, Mishum Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yanai Omer, Mokom Tiburo. So Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus says in Rabbi Elazar that all you need is a sella on its belly, and that will be enough for it to grow from there outwards. Boy, Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yishmael says, Nital Mokom Mashedra, Kulo Kayim. The Kulo Kayim. Let's say the only skin that's missing is the part that's by the spine. Until this point, we're saying all of it's gone except the spine. It's still kosher. What if all of it is still there, but the spine is missing? What happens there? So nital mokum tiburo. What if the one part that you need is the part by the belly? What if that part's missing? Kulokaim, but the rest is still alive. So nitlu roshe prokim. What if they don't have the skin by the top portions of where the bones of the animal are, by all the joints? So we said by the joints is also going to grow back. What if if that's the only place that it's missing? So the kulokaim, but the rest of it is there. So what happens then? So teku. It's not clear, right? We're not clear whether those points specifically are points that the skin will grow back from, or if it's an amount. Amar Rav says, Kolar ukulo matzel begluda. Any skin that you have anywhere on the animal is going to rescue the animal from being considered a gluda, a flayed animal. Chutz me'or beis ha-prosos. He says, except for the skin by the hooves, right? Skin by the hooves is not going to grow back. Rabbi Yochanan says, afilu beis ha-prosos, even from the hooves. Nami matzel, it's going to save the animal. So we ask the question, Rabbi Yasi me Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yasi asked Rabbi Yochanan the question, or beis ha-prosos, the skin from the hooves. Mahu sheyatzel begluda. Will that prevent the animal from being considered a gluda, a flayed animal? So Amar Le, he said, matzil, yes, it does. Amar Le, Ravasi said to Rabbi Yochanan that you're saying that the skin of the hooves is like regular skin, in that it will not be considered flayed. Limanatu Rabbeinu, you taught us that elu she'oroseha mikiv saron. These are the parts of the animal that the skin is considered like the meat of the animal. right? And that is as far as tuma is concerned. We know that tuma transmits to food. The skin is generally too tough to eat, so skin of an animal is generally not food. The truma won't be transferred to it like the meat. However, the skin of the hooves is, or besa prosos, the skin of the hooves is like meat. So if it's like meat, it's not like skin. So how can you say it's going to grow back? So Amar Leis, Rabbi Yochanan answers back, Al takni teni shebeloshon yachid ani shone oso. He says, don't ask me about that Mishnah. That Mishnah is a individual opinion. No, there's no. I explained it, but that's not the halacha. The halacha is not like that one opinion that the skin from the hooves is like meat. The Tanyas, we learn in a brisa. Hashochit es ha'ola. Somebody shechts a korban ola lahaktir ksais me or shel tachas ha'alya chutz l'mekomo, and he has in mind that when he shechts it, he's going to take a kazayas from the skin that's on the underside of the tail, which is very soft, and he's going to consume it outside of the right place. So puzzle. Now, normally, right, anything that is supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach is you can have it can become pigul or it could be chutzlim kamo chutzlis mano, but the skin is not. The skin gets taken off and given to the kohanim. So if this person says if it's something that's not edible and he says he's going to eat it, so then it's not pigul. This case is, he says he's going to eat the skin from underside of the tail. That will invalidate the korban and ve'ein bo kores, but there's no kores because it's outside of the right place. But chutz lizmano, if he says he's going to eat it outside the right time, then it's pigul. Then it is pigul. Chayav and lam kores, and you can get kores for that, which means that that piece of skin is considered to be meat. And Elazar ben Yehuda ish iblis am mishum Rabbi Yaakov. And Elazar ben Yehuda, a man from Iblis, said in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, V'chein haya Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, ish kfar Ikus omer, and also Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, a man from the village of Ikus, said, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Echad ur beis haprosos, ve'echad ur harosh shel egel harach. You also have to include in that category the skin that's on the hooves, and also the skin that's on the head of a soft calf. Ve'echad ur shel tachas ha'alya, and the skin that's under the tail. Ve'kol shemanu chachamim gabe tuma elu she'oreihem kivsaran. And anything else that is considered to be transferring of tuma also is considered to be meat as far as this prohibition of pigul is concerned. And therefore, it seems that it is not only that. So again, the point is that Ravasi is telling Rabbi Yochanan that this is not right. This is a single opinion. Sorry, this is Rabbi Yochanan. This is Rabbi Yochanan's point. Rabbi Yochanan's point was this opinion that the meat on the hooves, the skin on the hooves, is considered meat is an individual opinion. Well, who is it? It's Elazar ben Yehuda, Ish Iblis, who said it in the name of Rabbi Yaakov. That's only his opinion. Everybody else argued and said that that skin is considered skin, and therefore, like skin, I would agree that it doesn't make it a treifa because as long as you have a piece of skin there, the rest of the skin will grow back. And what other, since we said that we're going to say any place else that the Chachamim ruled the meat is going, the skin is going to be edible. So the havi or beis haboshes, if it's also considering the delicate skin that's around the genital area of the cows as well, that area is going to be edible as well, that skin. So any place where you've got skin that is soft and edible is considered to be not like skin. Chutz lemekomo pasul, and therefore, it's considered like meat. So if you think to yourself that you're going to burn it outside of its proper place, so then it is pasul, it ruins the korban. Ve'ein bo kares, but it's not kares, as we said, you're only chayv kares if you say you're going to eat it, be on the right time, not the right place. And chutz lizmanu, of course, if you do say that you're going to eat it outside the right place, then it's pigul and chayav of kares, and you would get kares. Okay, that is the end of that. We will let's do the Mishnah since we have a couple more minutes. Mishnah says, Elu trefos ba'of, and we're going to take out our bird when we see it tomorrow. Tomorrow's Daf Yomi is 8:45 because I'm going to be speaking someplace quickly before I come back, and I just don't want to be late and hold up everybody, so we'll plan to start 8:45. Elu trefos ba'of. These are the types of things that are a trefa by an oaf, by a bird. Nukufas havesht, a puncture in the esophagus. Upsukas hagargeris. If there is a probably you'd have probably until 9:45. Yes, probably so. Um, the if the trachea gets severed, hakata hulda. If it gets bitten by a weasel, al rosha on its head, malcolm she'osa osa trefa in a location that it is opposite the brain, where a puncture would puncture it and make it into a trefa. Nikav hakurkavan, if the gizzard gets punctured. Nikvu hadakin, if the intestines get punctured. Nafla le'or, if it falls into a fire. V'nechmeru b'nei me'eha, and it singes and changes color of the intestines or the other internal organs. Im yerukim, if they are greenish because of the fire, psulim, then it's possible. Im adumim, if however they remain red, so then ksherim, they are kosher. Drosa, if a person steps on it or kicks it. Tarfa, or he throws it, but Kosel throws it against the wall, then it's considered to be potentially concussed. Oh, sheritzatsta behema, mifar kesses, or sheritzatsta behema, if it got attacked by an animal. Mifar kesses, Vishahasa me'es la'es, if it moves, I guess if it stirs, but even if it doesn't get up to stand up, and it lives for 24 hours, Vishahasa me'es la'es, ushchata, and then you shaft it, it's kosher, right? So once you wait 24 hours, similar to the halacha by an animal. Says the Gemara, Rav u'Shmuel v'Levi to Amri machnis yodo lifnim. So he says the way that you have to be able to test whether if you've got a puncture in the head of the bird, right? If the weasel bit it, so you want to be able to tell, did the puncture go through into the brain or not? So the test is, right? This is going to get a little gross, right? Rav Shmuel and Levi, they say what you do is you put your finger into the mouth of the bird after you shecht it, and you press against the roof of the mouth of the bird, and bodek, and that is how you check. Im misbatzes va'ola, if the brain and the brain fluid comes out up through the head. So then, right, it's got a very light palate. So if you push up on it, then the brain fluid is going to shoot up out from the hole in the head. So treifa, then the bird is a treifa, the chicken's treif. Vim lav, but if it does not, then ksheira, then it's kosher. Okay, well, that's hanichal man amar ad deminkiv karma tata. So that's fine, according to the one who says that it's only a treifa, if the puncture goes into the membrane, right? It's going to go through the skull, but not through through the membrane also. Then it makes it a treifa. Then the brain fluid will spurt out. El mandamar inkiv ilah avagav delo inkiv tata. But what about the opinion that says that if the puncture goes through the skull, even if it doesn't go through the membrane, it's also a treifa? So then dilma ilah inkiv tata lo inkiv. Then maybe only the outer membrane has gotten punctured and not the inner membrane. And then when you push into the palate of the animal, of the bird, even though it's got a hole in the membrane, it's not going to spurt out because the other membrane will still be in place. So the answer is that the other membrane is very fragile. And so therefore, if the outer membrane has been punctured, if you push on the palate, the other membrane will rupture as well, and it will spurt out anyway. Okay, so let's stop there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rabbi Loiterman. Yasher
Thank you so much.
And
all right,
so we're continuing from where the Gemara answers. Isa?
Yes, that's what we are continuing on where the Gemara says Amar Ziri.
Amar Ziri, exactly.
Yes.
Amar Ziri.
All right. Hatzlacha Rabba tomorrow, Rabbi Loiterman. And
I'll see you tomorrow night in person.
And most of you will see you tomorrow night at 8:40.